Hello, hello. It is time for another Prezi presentation. So this time, um, this is a final word on rhetorical analysis. Although, let's be completely honest, our discussions of rhetorical analysis are never really truly over. Now, are they? So the purpose of this presentation, essentially, is to give you a greater sense of what rhetorical analyses are supposed to do, how they're supposed to function, and what they're used for in terms of our scholarship at large. So, first things first. So when you're starting out with your rhetorical analysis, you're going to want to first identify the rhetorical situation. We are all familiar with the rhetorical situation by now, or at least I hope we are. And familiar enough, I would hope, that you recognize that the rhetorical situation isn't some just kind of ephemeral thing that only applies to a couple texts here and there, but that really every text bears its own rhetorical situation, and it's really, really important to suss out what the text rhetorical situation is to kind of just see the baseline for why this text exists in the world in the form that it does, and for whom it exists, and just to really kind of riddle out the essence of its existence. That's important. So you need to identify, obviously, who the audience is, identify the purpose of the text. And this also includes talking about not only what the author is trying to convey, but also the mechanisms that they're using to convey that. So you also need to talk about context. So identify the occasion and or circumstances under which the text was created. And remember, when it comes to context, it seems trickier than it really is. But you're ideally going to look at context as the kind of container that the text was formed within. So we're thinking about like the time and space aspect. So the date it was created, where it was created geographically, what was happening in the political landscape at the time, what was the culture like, what are the pervasive values. And these might all seem really kind of unnecessary concepts to think about, but they all really shape the way in which a text is firstly the way it's conveyed, but also to whom it's conveyed, and it matters a lot. Trust me on this one. And then finally, you're going to want to identify the creator, the writer, and you're going to want to consider her credentials and her authority on the topic. And then when it comes to more creative texts, you're not only going to want to talk about the writer, right, or the creator, but whose voice is telling the story, because that matters too. And these two different speakers are not always going to be the same. So then you're going to examine the modes of persuasion at work in the text. So obviously your ethos, pathos, logos. And the reason we are moving from the rhetorical situation into the modes of persuasion are really, it couldn't be kind of a simpler concept, but you're essentially foregrounding your rhetorical analysis with a direct discussion of the rhetoric being used. So, and remember, every text uses at least one mode of persuasion. Many use several in different ways at different points within the text. So you don't have to be wedded to just one idea. You're going to then note stylistic details, also known as rhetorical devices. And these, as we have discussed, include, figurative language like analogies, metaphors, and similes, the way in which comparisons are made. Repetition is super important, and as I've said before, it's rarely a mistake, and often is used to draw our attention to some key details. Imagery. So this can be based on the images that we're using through language or through the visual images that appear in the text if it's more visually based. Imagery, I think we can also look at layout and design as a kind of imagery. Like, what does the way the text look say about how we should feel about it? Then we have the diction, word choice, language, and these kind of help to clue us into a lot of information about who the author is and who they're writing to, based on the kind of words that they use, based on their diction and their general use of language. Similarly, tone is helpful in establishing a mood for the text or our attitude or the author's attitude toward the text. And this can be subtle or it can be overt, but there's always going to be a tone. And then again, just like with repetition, look for opposition. Look at the binaries and how comparison and contrasting are used and how they allow the creator to more accurately get their point across, right? So he wasn't strong so much as he was muscular, right? He wasn't strong, but he was muscular. Instead of just saying he was muscular, right now we know about not only his physique, but also what belies what his strength and what we might not have thought before, right? So that's an important component to look out for. And then finally, you're going to analyze your information. And here is where, like, you're going to really get into the kind of the bulk of your rhetorical analysis, obviously at the analysis end stage. But think about how the rhetorical strategies and the modes of persuasion help the author to convey their purpose, right? So you started out by talking about the modes of persuasion, ethos, pathos, logos being used. You talked about the different elements of rhetoric that were seen within the text. Cool. Now compare those to the rhetorical situation, right? Who is the author? Who are they talking to, and what do they want to say? Do these rhetorical devices sync up to a proper and engaged address that really suits the rhetorical situation? The next thing you're going to do is talk about why the author might have chosen these strategies for the audience and purpose and context that they're writing in. Why might these choices be more appropriate than other choices? Or conversely, why might these not have been the best choices to make, and what could the author have done differently? And then it's also just super important to remember that you don't actually need to agree with the author or the argument that they're presenting, but you do have to analyze how well they're making their argument via their use of rhetorical strategies. So it's less opinion and more fact-based, right? Even though we're saying this was successful and this wasn't successful, the success of the rhetorical analysis is on how well it theoretically moves its targeted audience to act or behave in the way that the author asks them to, right? So with that all being said, I hope this cleared up any lingering questions that you had about rhetorical analysis, and definitely look out for further directions about your daily assignment, and I will talk with you soon.